all. That was a fantastic session. So we're moving with the first plenary speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Professor Emina Soljanin. Dr. Soljanin is Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Rutgers University since 2016. Before joining Rutgers, she was Distinguished Member of Technical Staff at Bell Labs for 21 years. Her research experience is broad, ranging from distributed computing to quantum information science. She's an IEEE Fellow, an outstanding alumna of Texas A&M School of Engineering. She's the 2011 Padovani Lecturer, the 2016 to 17 Distinguished Lecturer, and the 2019 President of the IEEE Information Theory Society. Emina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tina, for this kind introduction. I'm going to now share my screen. Bear with me for a moment. All right. All right, so this talk is part technical and part personal. So I'm going to be talking about some personal views. And it's about independence and interdependence, the non-technical part. And the technical part, which I will try to keep at a level so that everyone with some background in signal processing can understand, is about quantum key distribution. And except for these terms, which are independence and dependence, which we very often hear, in particular in communications, there is not really connection with the non-technical and technical parts. And I would like to make a disclaimer which says that that these things are non-related, because I would not like you to think that I'm now going to be talking about various quantum things that you can see in the internet. So there is no quantum success, quantum leadership, quantum consciousness, not even quantum love. So that is not going to be discussed. It's going to be a little bit of a quantum talk with then some personal experience over all these years since I became a graduate student and then worked as a researcher and then a professor. All right, so what's happened here? Okay. So I recently, actually last year to be more precise, got an NSF project together with colleagues from UCLA. And since I'm here emphasizing interdependence of fields and also in interdependence of people in their careers and private lives, I would like to say that there were two groups at UCLA. One more concerned with implementation, and they have a test bed, right? They have this experimental setup. It's a Professor Wong's group. And then there is a Professor Dovacek who is more on the coding side. So even though we were applying for a very small project, and even though they are together there at UCLA, they thought that maybe some bridging between these two groups is in order, and that's how I got contacted and was able to contribute to this project. Key distribution is, or you also hear key agreement, is the two parties, and we commonly refer to them, Alice and Bob, have to agree on a key. And I will not get into the details why is important and how it allows us to do secure communication, but they want to agree on a key. And that means strings of zeros and ones. And there is an eavesdropper, Eve, which can access quantum channel and the classical channel. So there are two channels between Alice and Bob. This quantum channel is going to be used for the distribution and classical for reconciliation. So then what is K and Q and D in QKD? So Kay, Alice, and Bob share a secret key if the following holds. They have identical and, very important, uniformly random binary sequence. So it has to look like it came out from tossing a fair coin. And it has to be secret, it has to be known only to Alice and Bob. So that means private, and since it's uniformly random, that means hard to guess. Now, what is QND? So quantum channel is essential for distribution. So Q is for quantum channel that we use to distribute information. And quantum prevents undetected eavesdropping. It does not prevent eavesdropping, it prevents undetected eavesdropping, meaning because of the laws of quantum mechanics, we can detect that there was an eavesdropper and possibly abort the protocol. And it's also important, this quantum part, for generating true randomness when QKD is what we say entanglement based. And I'll try to explain that in very general terms. There is no such thing as quantum key. So quantum key distribution is not a quantum key, is the distribution is quantum. So there are two steps in establishing or agreeing on a key. In the first, Alice and Bob generate something we call the raw key bits using this quantum channel. And after that is done, they're supposed to end up with random sequence of bits, but because the channel is imperfect, the detectors are imperfect, these raw keys on Alice's and Bob's side may disagree at some positions. They may be partly known to Eve, and they may not be uniformly random. And I'll tell you why. So that's something that we found in our research for this particular implementation. In the step 2, Alice and Bob want to establish what is called secret key. So that is the final product of this protocol. This is the end of this protocol, secret key. So Alice and Bob then communicate through the public, and that's classical channel, to reconcile these possible differences between their sequences, to amplify privacy with respect to Eve, and they may also want to compress their sequences to achieve uniform randomness. So here is a little bit of something that might scare some of you because it contains this quantum notation, but all it's saying, this first line, is that there are two photons. There is a photon, there is a pair of photons for each key bit, which is going to be one of these pairs of photons is going to be in Alice's possession, and the other one is going to be in Bob's possession. And to generate n key bits, we need n such pairs. So here, these two kind of weird looking things, which some of you will recognize as cat state, whatever it has subscript A is Alice, and whatever it has subscript B is Bob. And plus, whenever you think quantum mechanics, means some kind of superposition. It can be integral instead of plus if it's continuous. And then that means that a measurement can give you, a suitable measurement can give you either one or the other. So whenever they make a measurement on their photons, Alice and Bob will end up with either both having a 0 or both having a 1. And because this is a uniform superposition, they're going to have either 1, both of them 1, or 0 with equal probability. And see, for each pairs of photons, we obtain only 1 bit. And that was recognized as a problem because photons are really precious. We don't want to only get 1 bit. So can we get more? And this physics experiment, well, physics engineering experiment at UCLA, what it did is try to say, well, you know, let's use some kind of a variable that can allow us to maybe have more bits per photon, or instead of one variable, may use maybe different orthogonal descriptions of the photon, the properties of the photon. to obtain more, right? So now, if Eve is not present in the channel and the channel is noiseless, Alice and Bob sequences will be identical, and they be uniformly at random under these conditions, which under this assumption that I described. Otherwise, the raw key has to be processed to establish secret key. We said secret key is our final product, and that causes rate loss. So the secret key will have fewer than n bits. So our question is, what is the rate loss in something we called time entanglement based QKD? What is time entanglement based? Well, physically, there is a setup which there is a laser pump with coherence time TC. It arrives to this crystal, and it produces 2 photons. So one photon arrive, let's say, in this crystal produces 2 photons. Well, there should be a reservation of energy. It's not like 2 identical photons to the one which arrived. And those are produced at essentially the same time, and they may be also entangled in some other dimension like polarization, etc. So during this coherence time TC, another photon will appear, and that time is random. Another pair of photons will appear, and that time is random. And since it's random, it looks like a good source of a key, right? Of key bits. And also, time is a continuous variable, if you will, and that means I can generate maybe more bits than 1. So Alice and Bob will receive this photon simultaneously. That's what time entanglement means. But at random times. The detector photon arrivals may be detected by imperfect detectors, right? So they take their photon arrivals by imperfect detector, and the raw key is extracted from these hopefully coincidental arrival times. And then, since this is quantum, the presence of Eve can be checked by some special interferometers, which I may be able to mention, may have time to mention a little bit about how the presence of Eve is checked. So what is happening? So suppose you have someone kind of, some exponential clock may be ticking, and these points present clock ticks. So it can take a long time or it can take very short time, but it's random time. So there are these inter-arrival times, and the UCLA experiment shows that these inter-arrival times follow shifted exponential distribution. And the shift is a result of non-ideal detector behavior, and we'll talk about that. That is something which is going to help us. Theoretical model is the following. We are not, now if we can measure this very precisely, we can get very many bits, right? But that is, we cannot be very precise. For one thing, the detectors have downtime, and also we may not even want to be very precise because that will also make us see more noise. And we will see about that too. All right. So what do we do? So we discretize the time. So that's something that signal processing community is familiar with. We discretize the time, and photon arrives in each. Assume that photon arrives with each bin with some probability p, and that is IID. And actually, for inter-arrival times are then independent, geometric, and for small p. This process is Poisson, so the inter-arrival times are independent and exponentially distributed. Moreover, we then make frames that possibly correspond to the coherence time, but that's a parameter we can also play with, and bin size is also a parameter we can play with. So we say, all right, within this time frame, which contains 2 to the m consecutive bins, there will be some photon arrivals. And if a frame has only 1 photon, then the position of that photon is described by m bits, and that's how we get our key bits. So you see here that the smaller the bin size for a given frame size, the more bits I can extract. And the only frames that in this experiment, in this setup are kept, the only frames that we keep are those with single occupied bin. So this one, for example, here we will discard. There are some physical reasons for that, and sometimes are just computation. So, so some of you will recognize that this is a pulse position modulation, and it discards frames with multiple occupied bins. So in some of our previous work, we have proposed together with other people schemes which would not throw away that, because as I said, photons are precious. We don't want to be throwing them around away. It's easy to compute. So what we are interested in is the average, on average, how many bits do we extract per bin? That would be information rate per unit time, or raw key rate per unit time. That is going to depend if we don't we have just something ideal, just a bins. So we have to assume that there are bins. We cannot have infinite precision. If you just have bins and based on that we determine this probability P, then the information rate is just the entropy of P. If the photon arrives with each bin with probability half, that would be. If we did not have this framing, if we did not throw away these frames, but we throw them away. So we only have to keep those that have one bin occupied and n-1 bins non-occupied. So this is only those that are kept. Each one is worth log n. I mean, there are n such possibilities. Each one is worth log n, and to get something per bin, we divide by n. Very simple. And the reason I'm going here into detail is because that is something that is simple, and things become dramatically more complicated when we move forward. For adaptive schemes, the expressions are a little bit more complex, but they're still just elementary combinatorics. You know, there is some know-how and smartness to get it to compute that, but still that's something that. And in fact, one of my master's students, Christopher Chang, has a website. So here is, I'm not going to click here, but this is a live website that he can compute things. So for here you can choose various parameters. So he's built this tool that will tell us what these rates are. No problem. Detectors are non-ideal. They have non-zero downtime. So what does that mean? That means if I detected this red photon here, if the detector detected a red photon here, it goes to sleep. It cannot detect for some time. And if I measure, I can measure time in bins when I set up a bin size. So here is for 10 bins, the photon cannot detect anything. So we cannot detect them arbitrarily frequently. And so how does this non-zero downtime impact the raw and secure key rate? So we said it's very simple to compute the key rate, elementary combinatorics. If you want to do something smart, there is a little bit more work, but still fairly straightforward. And all of a sudden, this is not easy. So if I didn't have frames, that would be just a Markov chain. So what does this mean? That if I did not detect a photon for d units of time, that means I mean a detector, that means the detector can detect the photon, but only if the photon arrives, which happens with probability P, or not detect the photon, and it will not detect only if the photon does not arrive, which is 1 minus P. But once the photon is detected, the detector goes into this first state and has to stay here for d units in time. A little bit of reasoning, but definitely not anything that we that we don't know how to compute. So now what happens? And here I want to tell you that it was really instrumental for us that Chris had this web tool, because that developed an understanding in his head that actually made him compute that before many other people in the lab even knew what's going on, right? And so one way to understand how the framing affects these the computation of the rate is to look in some dramatic case. And I'm not going to go into the details, but let's suppose that your frame have just 2 bins and that your downtime is 1. And probability of generating is 1 of generating a photon. So if you did not have downtime, you would receive photons in every frame and you would just throw away that, which you should, because there is nothing random in this sequence. But if each time you receive a photon, you go to sleep, then this sequence that you receive is 1, 0, 1, 0. It looks really kind of nice and random. You know, it's not random, but it has half zeros at once. So it's not something that you would throw away. So that this is kind of to make a point. Maybe oversimplified, but it was something that once when you go thinking that this Markov chain is sufficient, you realize it's not. So so what we need is when we have this downtime, some analysis to confirm the key randomness, and then some methods, algorithms to compute the real key rate. So we said we are not going to be looking in this and saying, does it have zeros and ones, etc. So for the first, we developed, we just used a statistical suite. It gives you screens like that, which will tell you this is the frequency, this is block frequency, this is, so there are ways to measure that. And then we developed an algorithm to compute this. And that, remember that simple Markov chain, now the Markov chains become much more complex because they have to take into account this framing structure and also the, what is it called? The detector downtime. So I'm not going to go into details here, but if you have just 2 bins, in general, possible states with photon detection should be 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, and 1, 1. But 1, 1, that state disappears because your detector time is, there is a downtime, so you cannot detect a photon and again another photon. So you cannot do that. And so, so that disappears. Another thing is that Chris found a way to simplify these transition probabilities. Just to tell you how these, if you just move a little bit further, how this Markov chain get complex. So you cannot possibly analytically do much, but you can. He developed an algorithm to characterize this Markov chain and compute the entropy rate, because it's the entropy rate that is going to tell us how much rate we use or we still have. And this is a curve which tells you that, so let's just look in the red curve. I'm not sure how much visible the others are. It tells you the ratio of what you think you have in terms of randomness versus what you actually get. So for small p, the detector, and here we assume that the frame size is 8 and the detector downtime is 7. So for small p, even this large detector downtime compared to the frame size is not going to hurt you that much, because the photons are arriving so rarely that there is a very big chance that the detector will recover. When the detector will recover before you, what is it called? Before a new photon arrives, because of it, the p is small. So these other 2 curves, the purple is actually the real thing, and this naive computation, if you don't go through this kind of a complex computation, is the error you would be making. So now we can ignore this problem for small p. For how long depends on the values of DNN, and as p goes to 1, the rate appears to approach a constant, but that's an artifact. Okay. So now let's see. if we know this entropy rate, that's why we need to know it, we can compress, we can use some general compression algorithm to achieve uniform randomness. So all we need to know is the rate. Otherwise, we don't have uniform randomness, and therefore our key could be guessed. So what about detection errors? So Alice and Bob have identical keys if their measurement, if their measured arrival times coincide. Otherwise, they have disagreement. And both source and the detector cause detection uncertainty. For source, it's really negligible, it's very small. For detector, that's what we are trying to find out. And so as soon as you have disagreement, you have to perform something called information reconciliation. And that is done through exchange of some information between Alice and Bob through a public channel. And even if your quantum channel allowed you to detect the presence of Eve and remove abort your protocol and only keep the key that you know that Eve wasn't there, Alice and Bob have to use this public channel where Eve also can access completely. And everything that is passed through that channel will cause potentially some rate loss. And so what do you do? Again, since we are talking about independence and interdependence, larger bins cause both better coincidence and worse key rate. Why worse key rate? Well, if I have a frame, the finer my measurements are, the more bits I get, right? So if I have 2 to the 10 versus just 2 bins in a frame, that's a difference from 1 bit to 10 bits. So I want my bins to be small. But the more close, so small bins mean a closer look. So the closer I look, the more disagreement I see, right? So even in the private life, sometimes it's maybe good to close your eyes on certain things that are happening. So what do we do? It turns out that there is some optimum bin size, and that's the topic of the master thesis of my other student on this project, Nick Burnley, who will be actually defending his thesis on Monday. And so if you assume that the detection error follows some Gaussian distribution, so your photon is, say, sent here, but you can detect it sort of before and after, the detector has that problem. And also there is also some dark counts that are influencing it, but let's assume just the Gaussian distribution to see how this depends on the bin. So all of these, you're going to have as many errors as there are these vertical histogram lines in this graph. So this gives you more errors, but it also gives you more information. So what do you do? And as I said, it's not really Gaussian, and the modeling of that is also part of Nick's thesis, and it includes dark counts, for example, detecting other photons, not just those that are part of the experiment. So let me just check now how much time I have. All right, here I am. I think we can do like this. So this is the last kind of technical slides. So, and since this is a quantum thing, maybe I can tell you a little bit about the role of the quantum channel. So the point is that there is no passive eavesdropping on quantum channel. Right? You cannot eavesdrop on a quantum channel passively. Bob and Alice can detect you. And when QKD is based on something that we call maximally entangled photons, so think about that as a very strong or the strongest quantum correlation, we can quantify even Eve's information gain by playing something which is known CHSH game, and that stands for people who first thought about this. Nowadays, it's even used to detect if used in theory, right? That whether Alice and Bob are themselves cheating. And there is a field called, or subfield called, device-independent cryptography, meaning you're don't even depend on Alice and Bob or devices that are called Alice and Bob. And so just to give you a flavor of that, so suppose you're playing the following game, and it's in the classical world, not in quantum yet. So you have Alice, Bob, and the referee. And Alice and Bob, maybe very often they draw them on a different planet. So Alice and Bob may have been in some agreement before. They know that this game will be played to test them. And they may think about some kind of a strategy together. But once when the game starts, they cannot communicate. They're separated. These are now two devices which two parties want to use to establish a shared key, to agree on a key. And they're asking, can we trust these devices? So a referee is going to choose with equal probability either 0 or 1 for each of the players. So X here can be 0 or 1, it's sent to Alice, and independently a Y, which is 0 and 1, is sent to Bob. And now what happens is Bob and Alice, upon seeing that input, they decide to, they come up with each of them with a response, Alice with A and Bob with B. And what the referee does, he computes A XOR B and looks whether it's equal to X times Y. And if that is the case, he says Alice and Bob win. And you can think a little bit about that, but you will see that they actually win with probability, they can win with probability 0.75. And not more than that. And they can simply win that by always outputting 0. Because if they always output 0, their XOR is always going to be 0. And X times Y is going to be equal to 0 3/4 of a time, because X and Y are each 0 or 1 with probability half. It turns out that if Alice and Bob use a share, each share some of these entangled states, that they can apply something we call measurement on this state and produce quantum correlation, which will make this winning probability go to above 0.85, approximately 0.85. And so there is some interesting mathematics that shows that if Alice and Bob are winning with probability 0.85, you definitely can trust them completely. How much you can trust them if they're winning somewhere between 0.75 and 0.85, how much you can trust them that they're really producing randomness, correlating randomness, that's still an open problem. So with that, I just would like to say that two people I was mentioning as Chris and Nick are, Chris is Christopher Chang and Nick is Don Barberani. They're my master students working on this project. And we would also like to thank our colleagues, a PhD student from UCLA who provided experimental data, Murad Chan, and then some of my lab visitors, Ismail Karimi, who is a student at Texas A&M, and Phil Whiting, who is a professor in Australia. And then my PhD student, Bei Peng, for his feedback on an earlier version on not this talk, but yes, this first part of the talk when it was presented by Chris and Nick, actually. All right, so now I would like to move a little bit to talk about, start talking about my experience with independence and interdependence and dependence. There are two experiments. When the work on this project reminded me of two other cases that I was familiar with. One is this, if you look at the bottom right part of this figure, is Sony and Philips announced a joint CD task force. It was in 1979. Sony had a technology of optical recording in the 60s. But then this recording was allowing them to record lots of information on a small medium, optical medium. But when you listen to that, it wasn't good enough. So there were errors. And then also, not only in production, but people, when they use, before that we had records, they would scratch the surface, and there were kind of consecutive errors or bursts of errors. And so although Sony had error correcting coding group in, although Philips, did I use Sony before? And anyway, Philips had a technology, although Philips had error correcting group, they could not really find a way to deal with these errors. This is just roughly speaking, and they joined forces with Sony. They worked together, and then later they, Sony in fact beat Philips to the market. And maybe there are some people in this audience that remember that in the 80s is when we first time had these CDs, compact discs. So there would be nothing without these physical experiments joining with this mathematics of error correction. In the US, one of the instrumental things was the Reed-Solomon codes, which was actually there was a paper by US scientists, which was considered pure mathematics, but not by Sony. Right? They thought we can implement this, and they did. And now it's a commonplace. You have it everywhere, QR codes, for example. Very similar things you have also in the first CAT scan. First CAT scan was something, this was first clinical, but the first that happened in the lab was unreadable. You wouldn't like anyone making diagnoses based on that. So there were mathematicians who then, instead of using this first trial with Fourier transform, used tomography to make these pictures better and more readable. All right. So one of the people who helped in that is my colleague from Bell Labs, Larry Shepp. And what I'm going to talk next is my path from before Rutgers, so Bell Labs in the mid-90s, and before that I was a student, and before that I was a, then we'll stop actually. All right. So, so life and work before Rutgers for the rest of the talk. So what was popular then? Well, in the mid-90s, I joined in 1994, there was Shor's factoring algorithm came out, and I didn't know anything about quantum or quantum computing, so I didn't really look at that, but somehow it stuck in my mind because you remember a lot in some important points of your career, like starting a new job, right? Especially after graduate school. And so here on this side, we had mathematics, and on the other side, we had physics, and Peter Shor was in this math center. I was there too, and it was in this building. I was working on storage those days a lot, and an important person at that time in storage was Professor Jack Wolf, who said that actually Bell Labs was the most academic place I ever visited, and he visited many places. So why is that, right? So must be because of the Peanuts, right? The Peanuts is a cartoon that, again, many of you in your generations will not know, but these were these funny characters who were kids together, and they have kind of characters that correspond to just general human follies and virtues. So how were the Peanuts in Bell Labs at that time? So in mid-90s, Bell Labs had real researchers, And the peanuts, you may recognize some of us there. Here is yours truly. And here is Jelena Kovacevic, who is my high school friend and also the Dean of Engineering at NYU now. And the most importantly, right, the person who gave a plenary talk a few months ago in the IEEE Progress event. And there were some people, all of us are in academia now. There were some people who are not. There were people who founded Clarion, which was later bought by Qualcomm, and there were some people who came later. So how did we get hired? Well, at that time, Bell Labs needed very special people. So they needed jack of all trades to complete 80% of half of the list of some of the jobs that needed repair. Right? So we worked on all sorts of things. So speaking of dependence and independence, we had to know a lot, and many things kind of depended on us, because people would say, just ask the mathematicians. And none of us actually in that list was a mathematician, but nevertheless, that's how they refer to us. So what I learned the report of importance of friends and chocolate. So there is this saying which goes that one can never have too many friends and too much chocolate. And I don't mean Facebook's friends. I mean the friends that I interacted with and have coffee and lunch, etc., on a daily basis. And here I would like to show you that there were very few women, and I have some kind of a pictures that show me surrounded by many men, and I just didn't want to put them in this talk. I just want to show you again these ladies from Bell Labs, which are remarkable. And Jelena is here. Kavita got a number of awards this year. For Ingrid, there was a New York Times magazine article, someone called her Meryl Streep of mathematics. And another lady is, this black and white picture is Jessie McWilliams. And I looked it up in Wikipedia, at least. There is not much about her, but you know, she worked at Bell Labs, and then in the 50s got the chance to go back to school. And I believe she was a student with her daughter. And then later wrote this Bible of coding theory book with Neil Sloan, so McWilliams and Sloan coding. There are various things after her name, like McWilliams identities, for example. Very remarkable one. Before Bell Labs, I was in at Texas A&M, a graduate student. And before that, I was a undergraduate student. No, actually, I worked for 2 years after my undergraduate studies, but in undergraduate studies, I had this professor in the class who said, you know, there are these curves of lives that people think about, like Fibonacci spiral or exponential, but actually this kind of a saw curve, that is what the curve of life is. And he said, the higher drop is when you graduate. And he said, this is, you know, it's not exactly mathematical like this saw, but there are these ups and downs. And actually, maybe when you do a PhD is even higher, right? Drop, because you are the most senior at some place, and then you become the most junior. And as the time goes by, I think this becomes even more pronounced, these drops, because of the difference between the school and work environment. He was referring to something else. He was not thinking about, he was thinking about technical things. And he told us the story about big gloves. And that is when he went to work after his undergraduate degree in a power plant. He was, he actually worked in controls and electronics, and he was very proud to design this board, very tiny, very pretty, where you can, with a pressing of a few buttons, get what you want. But there was a problem, and everyone laughed at his proud achievement. Why? Because they said, look, this is for a power plant. People wear big gloves. They cannot press one little button. They have to press. they would press several at the same time. So this is not going to work here. No one is going to remove gloves to do this control. It may be even dangerous because you have to sometimes act quickly. It's a control sport. And so it depends who this is for. So you said, you know, I realized I have to think about such things. Also about the PhD topic, you saw this character in my Peanuts Bell Labs lineup. And this is one of my colleagues, Sarab Savari, who asked her professor when she was a student, Professor Gallagher, how do you know that you're doing a good research? And he told her, you really don't know. If you're lucky, you find out that in 30 to 40 years. And this was in the early 90s when she asked. In the mid 90s, the PhD thesis of this advisor of my friend became very popular. So today, many of you know about LDPC codes. This was his PhD thesis. So it really, in his case, was 30 to 40 years. But when he said that sentence, he was not really, he didn't know that what would happen with his thesis. So sometimes you really have to wait for a long time, and that may not be something that many people can do or want to do. It may not be their taste or their rhythm, and may be very impractical because we also need jobs very, very quickly when we graduate. Another thing that you may ask yourselves, at least my PhD students ask, is does success depend on the field? I mean, everyone says there are all these jobs in machine learning. Should I switch to that? And you know, nowadays, machine learning truly is important in the sense you have to know it like, you know, for general education, like you speak English, right? So you have to know some things, but one has to be careful about that. So here is me with all my various trinkets. And if I just jumped into another field, and believe me, I worked on things starting from power for my undergraduate or European diploma, kind of an MS in Texas to quantum computing now. You have to be very careful. And that is if you are in some other field, you may easily look like some kind of a cartoon character who does not know what's going on there. So be sure that your identity and integrity is preserved. What else does success depend on? This is Daniel Kahneman, who wrote this fascinating book some 10 years ago, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. There are some kind of related books now, or not exactly sequels, but related books which Professor Kahneman wrote with other co-authors, where he says, well, success is talent plus luck, like talent meaning also hard work. But what is great success? And then great success is a little more talent and a lot of luck. So you may or may not agree to that, but there are many factors, right? Whether you want to call it luck or not, at some point, many other things matter, and you need to find a way to live with that. Live with that, I mean, success depends on how you measure it and also how you see it in other people, right? What about this third topic that I brought, word interdependence? So you will find lots of articles about dependence, independence, and interdependence, that when you're a small child, then you are dependent, then you are strive to be independent, and then finally you should be interdependent, meaning you should work and collaborate with other people. And this pandemic definitely made us realize that we are not alone. And for me, that was an elusive concept, right? And one of the reasons was that I lost my parents relatively early. My mother died when I was 9 and father when I was 18. So I had to become independent. So interdependence to achieve was hard. It was very hard for me to rely on other people, even today, to rely on a student to maybe help me with the talk. Well, maybe not with this talk, but there is no even a single other talk that I asked for help. And also I've been involved, if you look at this picture, like 3 gears together and then these 3 gears together, I worked. I was a member of, that time was called Affirmative Action AA, since I joined Bell Labs, and the different names of these efforts. And only later, when these efforts achieved certain level, could this gear catch with each other, and only then could we really achieve some kind of help each other achieve independence. So there is no interdependence without independent thinking, I want to stress. So here is Henry VIII, who appointed other people to serve his interests, and there are many more, like, but one of the characters is, there is a movie called The Man of All Seasons, and a play, it's Thomas More, who said, who was supposed to you know, help with Henry to various, you know, divorces and new marriages, etc. So, so here Henry says, Thomas, I chose the right man for a chancellor, meaning you. And Thomas says, I should in fairness add that my taste in music is reputably deplorable. And Henry says, your taste in music is excellent. It exactly coincides with my own. Is that the point? You know, what does this a person bring to the table? Well, Henry had a certain interest, but if we want to grow as researchers, we need some independent thinking. So who should be our interdependence partners? There is this old movie where Woody Allen and Diane Keaton talk, and he tells her, you know lots of geniuses, you know. And then he says, you should meet some stupid people once in a while. You could learn something. So don't dismiss opportunities to learn from everyone, everywhere. So wise fools in many cultures. Some of you will recognize these characters from Turkey, and then onward is the Balkans, actually already, the former Yugoslavia, Greece. You probably recognize in this shape. And I want to tell you this story, which also emphasizes how we depend on other people. I believe it's called Lack of Reason. And so there is this character, Mullah Nasruddin, who is going on a donkey, and often is depicted like that, but he and a scientist are going over on a road. And really scientist, I believe, is used in that story. And the Mullah at some point says, look, I'm tired. And he says, lays down in the middle of the road, and he does not want to move. And the scientist says, look, I cannot, this is completely unreasonable, but since this person is not moving, what I'm going to do is lay next to him outside of the road. And the truck comes, and he looks and says, oh, there is a man on the road. And then it swirls and goes out of the road and kills the scientist, right? So this is how this unreasonable behavior of others affected the reasonable behavior, right? And we see it nowadays everywhere too. So Sartre says that hell is other people, but I believe that so is heaven. So don't dismiss other people. Learning survival skills from cat books. There are a few books that are about kind of cats are used as props. So I have learned a lot about them. For the proposals, there is this Save the Cat, which is not about proposals, it's actually about writing screenplays or movies. There is this funny book about how to argue or with people in a way, not necessarily to win, but you know, to find something that is the right solution. You know, if you're a young professor, you might, for your lab and your students, you know, you might need to learn how to tell if your cat is plotting to kill you. we talk a lot about diversity, and it takes all kinds to make the world. And programs like this, which is a wonderful endeavor, I really like a lot the schedule of these, the content of these workshops that Athena and the colleagues have put together. So we're really doing a very good progress in diversity and inclusion. And there is still lots of work to do. But what we are not doing that well, in my opinion, is interacting between fields. And it takes many fields to build a quantum computer, the same way as it took many fields and companies to build a MMRI, CAT scan, right, or CD. And I think as engineers, we actually are good. We should be proud of what we are doing. I think we are fairly inclusive. Interact with other fields, computer science, physics, math. And there is a little bit of protection of what people are, of their own research and turf. And there is a little bit of identity associated with what they're doing. So I was recently writing a letter of reference for a physics student because people in these fields take my quantum computing class. And he said, you know, all my things I'm interested in are in electrical engineering departments. And I said, well, okay, then apply there. So he said, well, but I'm a physicist, right? It's very hard to give up that identity. Or there is just fear that you need a different background, but it's very often just that identity. Then I want to conclude with a few words from my favorite book, which is called The Plague, and that has nothing to do with the pandemic. Pandemic, it may be, allowing us to see that these words are true. And the one main character is there says, to state quite simply what we learn of the time of pestilence, that there are more things to admire in man than to despise. And for me in person, he's then saying that the tale he had to tell, and he's thinking about that when the pandemic has subsided. So these are the words at the very end of the book. And when he looks at these jubilant crowds, he says the tale that he had to tell could not be won the final victory, but only the record of what had to be done by all who, while unable to be saints, but refusing to bow down to pestilence, tried their utmost to be healers. Meaning, we may not have to be a saint, but do your best to help others. And unfortunately, the plague bacillus never dies or disappears for good. So this is all I have to say. Thank you, Athena and Baruch, for inviting me again. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if someone has questions and we have time, I, of course, can share it again. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. It was a very, very interesting talk. I personally enjoyed it very much and I learned a lot from the talk. So thanks, Emina, for sharing this amazing talk and connected to your research and your experience and your vision all together. It was a very nice interconnected talk. I really enjoyed that. So thanks for being here today and sharing with us your vision. So I would like to ask the audience to see if they have any question. We have maybe time for a couple of questions here. So I see there is one question in the chat from Harry, is asking that how important is sense of humor for a research student?
I think it's essential. I think it's important for life. Especially if you don't have an easy one, and very few do. So there are, even if you are in general very fortunate and lucky person, you will have people around. You will have people you care about who are not, and you will have moments in your life that are not. I personally survived through humor, and I think being able to laugh at something is being able to necessary for that is being able to step away a little bit out of yourself and see yourself from outside and how it would look, how you would look to someone else.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Any other question from the audience? So I have one question which connects to one of the slides, one of your last slides, when you mentioned that different disciplines we should work more together, and you mentioned the examples about the student who was interested from physics and was interested in mechanics. So because I know there is a lot of students in the audience who are like PhD students and they are in multidisciplinary fields, and soon they're gonna get to the point that they want to maybe apply for a faculty position or something in that regard. How would you suggest for them to be open to go beyond their core specialty? I mean, how do you consider if what PhD student should reach to different departments? For example, if someone is doing biomedical engineering, that person should that person think about mechanical, aerospace, electrical, or I mean in general, how do you think that they should strategize their planning based on this multidisciplinary frame? Because before, maybe 20 years ago, fields were quite distinctive, but now the borders of some of the fields are a bit difficult, and I know some of the students struggle finding the best fit. So if you can comment on that, I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right to say that now it's more important than ever, because the things that we are making are more complex than ever, things as engineers. And you don't have to go as far as building quantum computer, but everything else, they really requires people at different skills. And to be able to interact with other people, you really have to know a little bit. So when I teach quantum computing, for example, I say, look, this first month, even if you never do anything that we do later, like algorithms, if you want to work in this field, if you want to talk with a physicist, this is what you need to know. So you really, first, it's in that sense challenging. You need to know some basics of some other fields. Second, which is essential, is you need to be able to listen to people. You know, you really need to see what they're saying and their point of view. Third is actually tricky. You may want to go overboard and maybe jump to another field, but one has to be very careful here, especially if you are young faculty in your tenure track years, where you want to say, what is that you're doing, right? People, one of the famous people, I will not say his name because it's really very well known, you wouldn't believe that that's what he said, but when we were both at Bell Labs, and it was not someone who was there in the picture, said, you know, I would like to have something like you have this storage. When people think of magnetic recording, they think about you. And when they think about you, they think about magnetic recording. And that's also important, so that you're associated with some area and seen as an expert in some area. Because we have not learned yet how to respect the bridge people who are essential and becoming more and more essential. So to recap, listen to others, learn a little bit about other things, or at least try not to offend others. And, you know, I've been at meetings where people are very careful not to offend others with respect to ethnical backgrounds or color of the skin or various things like that. But they were so easily offending other fields, which is also part of identity of a researcher or engineer or person.
I see your point. That's very interesting and very helpful for me and many other students and young faculties and postdocs. And I think this is great. Thank you so much, Emina. I would like to thank you on behalf of the organizing committee for taking your time and sharing your vision here. It's a great pleasure. It has been a great pleasure having you at this Progress, and we hope to have you again in future Progress events. Because of the time, we need to move to the next part of the event. But I want to once again thank you for your time and for your efforts with sharing your vision and experience with our young researchers, and hopefully they learn a lot. I'm sure they learn a lot through these talks and your talk, of course. And yeah,